combining, all the different sort of mindsets from the architecture, engineering background, software development, and so on. So over time, we were involved in a lot of different initiatives that touch on every single thing that everybody talked about here. So from the consulting side, you have a very unique perspective because you talk to many companies that are trying to solve different problems, and then you find patterns in those problems that are kind of the same that people are trying to solve. So this is just focused on the 7 years that the company's been around. We have a pretty group of smart people that are working on research, R&D, and kind of finding practical ways of developing solutions, and this has been accelerated just this past couple of years. I'll share some of the sort of lessons learned, things that we've been involved, working with and collaborating with companies, as well as doing internal sort of proprietary technology. But this is driven from, thousands of conversations and a lot of meeting notes and a lot of proposals and a lot of engagements that were completed, some at different stages. And what I'm sharing here is not just theoretical perspective, but more of like field notes on, our experience directly involved in how to solve a lot of problems and the pursuit of intelligence. So the question is, over time, did we become more intelligent or just became faster at doing the same things? And you see that there's a common pattern that, I like to refer to, which is like people, chase shiny objects, right? And then they see fantastic things at the conferences, and the first thing they want to do is try it out, which is not really the right approach, and I'll talk about more about that. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was the Jetsons. The Jetsons is cartoons from the 60s. What's cool about them is that they predicted a lot of things that are happening today, years ago. And then what's interesting is that the same sort of, we thought about this, is that we spend years working on developing some solutions that we thought were gonna, be mind-blowing and disruptive. And then all of a sudden, if you don't have a really good marketing plan, somebody can beat you to it. But the thing is that years ago, things that were considered impossible, well, we made it happen. And this is just an example of an assistant that you see today that does all the MCP stuff and the things that you were looking at for agents. We tried that thing 3 years ago and we made it work, but it took hundreds of hours and a lot of people researching and trying. And then today, a $20 subscription of Claude or ChatGPT or Nano Banana can give you the same thing with the default out-of-the-box solution that is not even marketed to a particular industry. So long story short, what seems impossible today, it's something that tomorrow is going to be already sort of marketed or available. So it's a different way to mindset. So this ties into how people are seeing their digital maturity, and everybody has different objectives. In the end, is how do I do more with what I have, and then what kind of intelligence can I achieve? And it has different sort of levels. I mean, you start by digitizing, automating, and then sort of doing gaps analysis and seeing where you can find sort of the most value for things that you can automate, or the different ways to categorize a firm is kind of subjective. But here's just a full framework of if you were to rate things based on from dimensions that are from data to financial, and then kind of looking at each dimension based on characteristics that are observable, and then multiply that by the dimension weight, it sort of aligns, a category for somebody that, wants to see sort of where they fit. But from our experience, we get requests for developing solutions, and some of them are custom, some of them are more sort of robust and could be their own startup. There's one thing that is a pattern that we've seen is that everybody's chasing things that may not be sort of the right thing. So I think it's one of the phrases that catches the most our eye is, it's not missing a trend, which is the fear of missing out, but then it's chasing the wrong trends. So one of the things is, working on things that are in the wrong quadrant. What that means is that, you always hear about chase low-hanging fruit opportunities. What can provide the most amount of value in a short amount of time? And of course, you can measure ROI and then have time benchmarks and things like that. But then, it's sort of this quadrants where you can have things that are incrementally, providing value, or things that are going to be very risky. And again, there's a lot of seductive things that are very visually compelling. And then again, we get approached to develop things that, range from code compliance. Can I have an AI that can automatically tell me how to optimize a building for any sort of building rating, green building rating system, and then provide sort of building materials and calculations and compliance and checking codes. And sometimes we get requests for things that are like 7 companies in one. So in the end, it's what makes sense and is the infrastructure there. So the one thing that we hear architects and engineers, we categorize it, there's more, but I think number one is the invisible work, which is production. Anything that happens, for generating, documentation, sheets, anything related to, being able to produce, faster documentation for submittals and so on. Then of course followed by, not just the documentation, but anything with design intelligence, like generative design for different processes, synchronizing sustainability analysis, as well as model compliance and checks for other things. This kind of sums it up, but overall what we see is an institutional problem. It's not that we lack the AI capability, it's that firms haven't built the process, governance, or the data discipline to have their expertise turn into machine-readable information. So one of the number one things that we hear is, for the past few years, is building sort of an internal super chatbot, or something where people can sort of eliminate or reduce tribal knowledge, which is, reaching out to the senior engineer or senior architect to, where do I find certain information, look at such project and some communication from past historic information. But then basically, it's combining all this sort of dense, knowledge that is in somebody's head. And then, so what we see is, 2 things that are converging right now that are pretty exciting. Number one is, you heard a lot about agentic architecture, agents, which again are different from chatbots because you basically can orchestrate, different sort of task execution, and then also, work in across different ecosystems of tools, not just a Revit or Navisworks or whatever application, but then the ability to orchestrate models, which include, visualizing information from images, from videos, from text, and so on. So in the end, you're orchestrating all these sort of, models to perform different tasks. But then the ultimate sort of more recommended approach is the one where, you have a sequence of events that are, like what is the status of a project based on, schedule information, based on model clash coordination, based on RFIs, on emails, combining all this dense data and then providing you with insights in terms of, here are all the things that the agents already perform, and then be able to have that, where you approve information. So these are just a couple of examples. For example, just to be able to interact with the tools. Most solutions today, there's ways that you can enable sort of Claude or ChatGPT type of access. That's going to change dramatically with MCPs, which I'll talk a little bit more. But then this is an example of just simply maybe a request that we received like 10 different companies asking for the same, which is not just compiling, I want to generate, certain type of key typical details, but then find them, place them on views, generate the sheets, and then organize them in a particular category. That saves about 4 or 5 hours per engineer or per architect, right? But then taking that into another level, we had a client that basically says they work on giga projects where there's average sheet size is 5,000 plus sheets. So then how do they handle markups and red lines, which is a very common practice still today, where people have Bluebeam sessions and then they share all those notes and then applying them back into the production teams. And they have to have that cross-reference against markups, from RFIs, from survey data, from point cloud even. So these are examples of the other convergence, which is not just access to information that is from different sort of data sources and cross-referencing them into insightful, insights. Pardon the redundancy, but in this case, it's just an example of being able to take the PDFs, interpret those PDF markups as actions, and then those actions basically updating the information in the Revit model, for example. This is something that when we first talked about it with a couple companies about 2 years ago, we budgeted about a year and 2 developers full-time to develop the solution. This that I'm just showing you here was done in a week. So that's the second convergence that we see today, which is that vibe coding is now reached a level of productivity, like giving a Ferrari to somebody that knows how to drive it. So, but even people that don't know how to drive it can actually get that sort of level of productivity increased exponentially. I can talk an hour just on things that we've been putting in practice internally that are fantastic and driving results. And again, how accurate is this? The cool thing is that you can sort of prototype things in a way that it was impossible a year ago. The MCPs, which is the next thing I'm going to show you, is basically the universal translator. It's a very disruptive technology. So what it means is, it's like the USB moment. I don't know if in the past, in the 2000s, you have different connectors for charging your phone. This is what's happening with interoperability. So an MCP is not a product, and you heard it today. It's a protocol. It's an open source protocol that allows you to now have all these systems interact. That was the missing connectivity tissue between all these systems. So what's cool about this is having this sort of level of control. Think of it like an air control tower, where you have a command center and you basically have all these things. In this example, basically you have multiple things that are pulling from different sources. Check the construction cloud for the latest PDF markups or any model updates. Prioritize all the different changes based on specific team members and then the type of risks and priorities. And then execute any changes directly into the model from the PDFs or from whatever issues. And then from there, run a clash detection. So then that clash detection is going to then perform specific calculations and run a report. And even tools that we developed, and Enrique will talk a little bit more about this, that perform certain algorithms for prioritizing clashes and then being able to be mindful about what's happening, and then providing not just that, but incorporate all these changes in detail. So in a nutshell, you can have 7 different platforms: the construction cloud, Procore, emails, all connected, and then perform tasks that can be repetitive, but also pull information in a contextual awareness level. So that's something that, again, taking that idea to the next level, that could be a startup. Like, you can have a command center that has all these sort of different capabilities for project controls. There's a number of startups that I've seen in the past that try that and fail, that they want to become an AI project controls that can tell an owner, are you late or are you on schedule, and are you on budget? So that kind of thing, it's not an idea anymore. It's something that you can run. So what do we see from the front lines? One of the things is we see that you're solving the same problems repetitively, but treating each one as a custom. The other one is there's a gap between tools and intelligence and infrastructure. So people want to automate things when they don't even have standards, or they want to get insights and dashboards when they don't even have siloed data information, systems that don't talk to each other. And then the biggest thing is faster execution doesn't mean better strategy. It means that AI makes execution cheap. I'll just show you a company that could have taken a whole year to develop a tool that can be done in a week as a prototype, working prototype. And then does that mean that because you do it faster is better? No. In fact, you can produce more garbage faster. So that's the thing, is being able to have that level of sort of intelligence built into decision making. So how are people addressing this? Again, there's a combination of approaches. I think, again, there's a range, and it could be a survey. Where do you find yourself? Are you, it's a committee model where people that don't have time meet once a week to talk about different technologies, or you have resources and the amount of time and people that can actually vet hundreds of applications, which, by the way, is the wrong approach. You don't want to just test technology just for the sake of technology. You want to, be able to have a meaningful sort of business driver and strategy. But anyway, so the reason that I highlight external partnership is not because, number one, there's a number of things. You rely on people that have done it before or have the expertise, but then you don't have to hire people. It's sort of a faster way to market, whatever initiative you want to do. The other thing is, you heard this, learning from failure. So what that means is, there's always a shiny object, which we see a ton of that all the time. There's the data desert, which is systems that don't talk to each other. I think I can tell you maybe 20 projects where we build connectors, just construction cloud to Salesforce, to Dropbox, to Procore, to whatever systems, because they didn't exist any particular integration of flowing the data. But then MCP is revolutionizing that in the way that it wasn't available before. One example quickly is chasing something like a digital twin strategy where we convince the owner, healthcare facility, and then they actually wanted to implement the entire sort of, let's digitize the specific buildings, pilot it and so on. They bought 100 iPads. And then because they didn't plan long-term and the change mindset and the change management and then also the infrastructure, a year later, they have the iPads and nobody's using it. So again, this is one example. We built a super urban planning tool that took about 9 months and 2,000 hours. And that project continuously shifted based on a vision that was not clear. So it meant that we could have spent easily another 2 years developing this optioneering tool for urban planning based on all these sort of scenarios. But in the end, what we found is there was a couple things. One was the API knowledge infrastructure. So what it meant is they didn't have, they didn't even know what sort of limitations and constraints were available for the systems that they wanted to use, like S3. They invested on the Microsoft Azure platform. And in the end, there was all these silo initiatives that they wanted to bring together. But anyway, this kind of maps some of the things that we see that, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of people that are trying to build tools around it. But I think it's a combination of not having the right infrastructure and then, be able to just attack a problem without having sort of a clear problem in mind that you want to, address. So in a nutshell, these are predictions that we can see based on our experience directly. And it's right now, probably in the next few months, you're gonna see MCP become more standard infrastructure. So all these agentic workflows from experimentation are gonna transition into something that can be delivered in a pipeline. Then the ability to have the agentic workflows, like what you saw in the examples here, is gonna be fantastic because now all this MCP is gonna enable that. But then the decisions that were previously impossible in terms of being able to have stages of all this combined infrastructure is going to be, the next sort of level of iteration. So just like the Jetson analysis, the next era of architecture won't be defined by firms that are using the best AI tools, but the firms that are the leadership that is courage to fundamentally rethink how they work together, how they work now. So there's a combination of things that are going to be required. But basically, the technology is ready. AI, all the things that I showed you here are available. They can be implemented. The problem is a lot of institutional sort of thinking. So that sort of sums it up. And Enrique is going to expand on the next slide. Thank you.
Hello. So, introduce myself, I'm Enrique Galicia, I'm Director of Innovations and AI from Leap, and I'm here to share some common ground about journey of implementing sustainable AI and the deterministic field of architectural requirements. So I'm here to connect with questions that may be undermining general grounds in automation and innovation. So first of all, like that one. Just a little breaking around, playing with Nano Banana to have some elements. And I think we're in a very chaotic era, which with a lot of buzzwords, bubbles and trends are complicating the way with too much development and innovation. Main aims on deep efforts are related to finding and blending trends on AI and on the AEC industry. So a little background within our journey is that we started working with, so there are some samples. We started with a lot of stable diffusion, tried to use it on different platforms, but then the race upon that one 2 years ago was too encouraged, was a lot of developments being worked around. We were using large language models and as well within, was stable diffusion and a lot of replicates. But I think the cohesion and to make it something sustainable to be sellable was very complicated. It was out of our hands because as soon as you were putting a lot of effort to develop, it was also somebody else doing it, and as well there were a lot of competition, and there's like, how does that one is going to be working, right? So complementing to that one, we got a lot of features that were efforts integrating requirements, LLMs, stable diffusion, and we get it into the use of segmentation, of splitting analysis, splitting images, creating things that go in that one. And it was very complicated in those terms because it was not that you were with the infrastructure to create a language model or a process itself, but you wanted to blend it in so that you can have like how those working flows work. And then we get into things of the idea of this space being transformed with data, how does that one get improved, how does that one get connected. So from that one, on this journey of, I'm trying to shrink 2 years into just like some snippets, but in this case we were also using it for having like material, some sustainability, some workarounds on how to get it and how to make it easy to attach to a language model. So this is another sample. This one is called Itera. So Itera was doing iterations upon a visibility of image, having all the mixtures of data upon like different type of escapes, using databases on the background. And I think we can go to the next one. This one is also called Materia. This one was doing analysis from databases of carbon footprint, using the mix of language models and other elements. So with those samples, I think we're good to go for the next step on the talk. So first of the problem, it's AI is probabilistic and architecture is deterministic. So tools that need a solution that needs to be straight ahead needs to be deterministic so that they cannot have a chance of being something probable to be certain. And as well with AI, it needs to be very specific within that tool. So we started working deeply on the tools we have within algorithmic solutions. So there are some samples working around. We were doing a lot of development with Dynamo and a lot of with Revit API, because in this case, using a platform that is already sustainable on those terms for creating elements was very useful. For those samples, we started then testing vibe coding at that time, and it was very helpful on creating more nodes, more solutions, more tests, having some ramp up of data, technical data. Then therefore we also work around a lot of MEP elements to be self-connected, reconnected, and working it around. And you see, like, I'm putting these two pictures of, using it very flashy, shiny object, working around for something that may seem a solution you can sell, but also saying, like, if you work your craft upon the things you know what you need to do, therefore, perhaps that, with the help of AI, will make a change. So that makes the number 2 highlight, which is foundational structure, nurture future systems. And I'm just going to point it out very clearly because I think that's the best way to have it a clear conversation. The first one is the MCP Model Context Protocol, which it's already been for 1.5 years, mostly. And what it does is like it's a protocol that allows to transform information from one way to the other one. The real change I saw within the MCP was the moment that it was connected directly so that it was helping vibe coding. So it was not coding and pasting and snapshots, but actually putting it into the workflows of creating a new application. The next foundational element is the context, because the context and however you are feeding the AI, even if it's a ChatGPT or Claude, you are having a reference file that says like, hey, you like using this type of things. So those become guardrails, and in those guardrails, the more they are connected in between everybody else using it, then it nurtures the complete set of the complete company. And the third one is the interaction. So interaction is within the use. You are using it, you get advantage. Like, how do you expect to use AI if you are not at least talking 2 or 3 times? You're getting, how does that one respond, or how are you failing it with the use of it? So then we got it into this one, that it's how to grow a system with AI. So just putting it very simple notes that I think will be helpful in the case that you think you're missing out, because I think we're on a very foundational stage of developments, because it doesn't matter how fast or how better the LLM models get, because right now we have the chance of work our craft to create tools that are actually connecting. So I'm putting here, very simple, but my recommendation will be use it within Cloud. Very important to use MCP servers, just to test it, that you know you're using your machine, but don't do it generally. Use it within a specific folder, within a contained environment, without having security issues, because in that case you can get familiar with that one, and you can have either samples of things you want to develop, or to read, or to analyze, right? Yeah, and as well, having those being saved so that you can say, like, yeah, we can use those as guardrails for the next thing. So just very simple reference of a MCP. It has 3 components. It is the server, wherever it's running the hardware, whatever is happening within the actions, the one that is executing commands in Revit. The second one is the client, that is, where are you calling it from? That's going to be your Ferrari in this type of analysis. And your language model, which from a good thing, you can, if security is an issue or matters, or you're using confidential information, you can just use an Olama local. If you are having a computer 64 gigabytes with an 16 gigabytes of RAM, you can have it locally, and therefore you can train for that one. And then we go for the next part that it's upcycling knowledge to be safe and sustainable. So firms lose institutional knowledge every time a project closes or a person leaves. So you're having these queries, you're creating these tools, you're using these workflows. Somebody leaves and you don't have it saved, then you lose it. For upscaling, it's the type of connections that you have. If you are not familiar with context protocol, I'm also sharing some references, just going to get there. And then the use of guardrails. So this is a very simple sample of guardrails. This one is being used internally when we want somebody that it's a coder or non-coder to work around. So they say like, yeah, I want to do this application, but I don't have anything about code. Just use the word by code, and that will run into a file to see, hey, what are you trying to achieve? The better tool you will use in this case, because that aligns with our practices, is having an MCP, is creating a Revit API, is creating a web app, is using web services. Then, as more as you use it, you save those preferences, and then you can share it. So, I think in the middle of having fear of not sharing, but also of using that knowledge to teach others or to have them being guardrail, that lies the nature of making it easier to use. Then some case studies. The first one is Obstáculo. Yeah, the names are getting like in the middle of Spanish, Italian, but they get like this nature. So Obstáculo is a class detection tool. It was developed from 2019. It was taking like 5 years of development. Then in 2 weeks, it was already refactored, improved, getting all the lessons learned, added to the guardrails, and then reuse it for the team. So we have here is like very simple video. And as well, it's already been created so that it can connect to any other type of MCP. So what it does is actually getting the elements, getting it from the number of you have it, and then you can run it. So if you already know the tools, you are not actually querying the Revit API, but you are actually just going for the ones you are using. So I think in this case, the more you use it, the more you know what type of tools might be useful for your business case, and therefore they can get improved. Second sample I have here, it's called Sequenza and Mostra. Sequenza is a 4D simulation tool, and Mostra is for selecting elements and creating visibility. Improvements done within the vibe coding was just to test it in 2 weeks. So very useful to be shared or to be used. It's just selecting elements, analyzing all of them, knowing when they start, how do they visualize, how do they go in phases, and therefore they can just get crossed. But the point there I'm trying to say is like this type of vibe coding will be possible without the use of MCPs, but also within all the knowledge of how does a tool get used. Is it? Yeah, some sort of like that. So it's looking for location, it's getting all the elements, it's running. Because it's running directly on a deterministic type of way, it runs very fast. And therefore, that one within the questions can row within an LLM model. So almost about to finish. This is 3 QR codes if you want to take it. There are like 3 free courses. They are just 2 hours each. So very simple ones, just going to straight to whatever they need. So there's one that is coding fundamentals. If you have never coded, it's just basics of C#, Python, and JavaScript. Vibe coding, if you want to create desktop apps, web apps, or any type. Also, how do you get the Rails? And the MCP development, having like, if you want a studio, an HTTP, using it with, it's good to work around, right? Like, so that will be helpful. Also have another, I'm having another topic being developed upon MCP servers using ACC, which is more web related. And yeah, I think that part of main set of OpenLib is preserving human agency while systematically augmenting decision making. So that will be all from my side. This is the 2 QR if you want to connect. I'm more than happy to share or have comments around. Questions? No questions? AIA, question.
I have a question for the first gentleman. You mentioned something about red line efficiency or red line optimization. I just wanted to, if you could explain a little bit more, like what was the problem and then what was like the solution with that sort of redlining task?
So in that particular case, basically we get approached sometimes with napkin sketch ideas. Hey, we want a solution to solve this problem. Then they don't give you very much detail. But in this particular case, the client already had very specific examples. I showed you one example of the details. They sort of outlined 3 categories. One was annotation level changes, where if you have thousands of sheets and you have, this workforce of people are going to be, taking all those markups and updating the models and the drawings, then what they wanted to do would be quickly and accurately update anything related to text, annotation, tags, labels, and so on. The other was model changes. So, whenever there was an update, which sometimes the markups are just like text, written by hand on a digital iPad, then basically that was another level. And then the other one was the details, like adjust this detail based on this particular notes and then change that or update it. So what we did was initially sort of approach it by, can we do like phase 1, which is just the annotation level. So we prototyped the 3 options and then they all work, but the level of accuracy varies. The most accurate one is annotation related. So anything with text, dimensions, all of that can be practically achieved easily. Again, in the past, this kind of solution would have taken a long time and effort. And most companies don't want to partner up and develop the tool, and then in the end, you either own the property or they don't want to own the IP because they don't want to maintain it. Maybe they work as with an ecosystem of people, and they don't want to turn into a product company. So in the end, what we've seen more relevant is with this approach, you can sort of validate the proof of concept. You can validate that the solution is sort of mapped into what is actually the problem, and then just define a strategy to see if you actually continue owning that IP, which we've done in the past, or if that's the preference. But what we're trying to do now is kind of identify all these different sort of repeated requests, and then see that there's a pattern of people trying to fix the same problem. But then see if it works. Like, can we do it? And is that something that's not going to take months of development? And then have another product come out, and then just basically kill the effort that you just did. So that's the thing about all this software. A lot of it is powered by AI, that is sort of the bigger tech companies like, on the visualization side, on the LLM side, on the, sort of cognition side. So all of those are powering all these other ones. So in the end, what happens is, as soon as any of these bigger players come with sort of a disruptive improvement, then it kills half of the ecosystem that you just saw, today. So there's a lot of tools that are powered by all this. Just today, Claude, or yesterday, released an update in terms of explaining you graphically with diagrams, and that was impossible before. And we tried to do that in the past because there was somebody that wanted to do a large-scale implementation for training, where they just want to kind of prompt something and then not just like read a manual or read a video or watch a video. Simply give me the explanation on how to do it step by step, but graphically, so it's more compelling, right? So you can do it now with $20 a month. So in the past, it took a lot of like diagramming and architecting to see how that works. But anyway, long story short, it was the problem that they wanted to fix, the annotation side. That was the beginning of the first problem. If that answers the question.
Any more questions? Yeah, there's a question.
Yeah. I want to say thank you again. Can you maybe just give a little more context about how your company engages with the design, a typical design firm? Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Just trying to get some context. I mean, it sounds like you guys have been at this, you said, for a couple of years, and 7, and then working with LLMs recently here in the last couple, it seems, or just for those of us that are behind the curve, trying to catch up and trying to figure out, you've got a director of AI and innovation that role didn't exist, still doesn't for most of us. And so how does a company go from zero to, all the things that the 2 years worth of R&D?
How do you navigate that as a company?
Thanks.
So there's always a lot of initiatives that companies are taking on internally. The larger ones, they have the team and resources to address those long-term initiatives, 5, 10-year plan, or short-term initiatives where they want to see quick wins. So in the end, what we're trying to do is sort of combine the internal sort of team, which is made up of architects, engineers, software developers, and then sort of that intelligence sort of component that Enrique is leading with the R&D. And we've done R&D on so many different sort of practical uses of, how to scan the building and then turn that point cloud into a model quickly. A lot of it is driven by engagements that we have that are more traditional. Like we have a BIM manager or a BDC digital delivery person augmenting a project because the company didn't have one. So how can we sort of establish sort of a longer term relationship where there's more value? So we're always prototyping solutions. We have a guy that was hired for 4 weeks, he's going in a year on a project for data centers where the guy's coming up with all these digital solutions. And I think he's already built like 20 apps. He built the first MCP inventor the first Autodesk Inventor, MCP. So you're able to create all these things. And that came from another engagement where we were doing value engineering for structural analysis for data center skits for specific cases. But anyway, that how we sort of engage is, a lot of it is, ideas and solutions that people are trying to bring into reality. And most of the times they're just problems. That's on the digital solution side. A lot of it is just like typical sort of more low-hanging fruit. How can we improve productivity? How can we revamp our digital practice? And then basically set up the foundation so that if you want to look at AI enablement, how do you get there? It's not immediately overnight. You have to have all these different things, even standards. Like some of the standards that we see, they're not updated, or they're like obsolete, or they're not taking into consideration a lot of the technology innovation. So, I mean, if you look at like a BIM standard for project execution for, a project, like the size of Google, for example, for whether it's data centers or any type of building, I haven't seen any like major shifts in just the requirements. So then what should you be asking, in those kinds of new deliverables? But again, it goes back to, the simple things. Like in the end, we got to submit, PDFs, or we have to connect to a specific, tools. But hopefully that answers the question.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Like the light on.
Yeah, I gave you, I wanted.
That was good.
Thanks, that was a great presentation. I like how you broke up. One thing that, since you touched on the vibe coding, and you actually are proof that this is possible to accelerate it at a 10x or 100x that was mentioned earlier, right? What I saw at the scale conference too is the fact that there's more commits coming in for development, basically agents making more commits than humans to software development, and that's going to accelerate more. So there was a lot of discussions about how do we generate trust on what's being built that is useful to the use cases I think you're identifying, and I think that somewhere in the middle, I don't have an answer, I'm just more a question, let's see what you think. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I think there's our ability to actually look at these things and say, this makes sense, this is a good experiment, throw it away, this one's dangerous, don't even touch it, that type of thing.
I mean, from my experience, it needs to be curated on each step, right? Like, you are not just growing from one to having an orchestrated type of agents running within everything type. So you gotta like, this code is working, how do you find any type of issues? How do you find like vulnerabilities, securities, or algorithms that may go loop or something that it's, and then if you see that that one is working around, therefore like getting the feedback. So the feedback loop, it's critical part on how you're working with it so that you are actually getting trust. It's not that you will ask for a big type of development, but you can go like, yeah, this proof of concept, this other one, then they connect, then we can reduce functions. Therefore, they also need to have checklists. And as everything is getting forward, then the commits will be already like little proofs, right? Like they are not just going savage within all of them. But yeah, I understand on that point that we're putting some like use of coding upon the GitHubs as well, so that when somebody is submitting, it already checks that it already has followed the guardrails, if they very review type of character or being very curated. then therefore it will.
I'll share a 30-second example. Internally, just like you, we want to keep the organization lean, but be able to do exponentially more with the team that we have. So one of the things that we're doing is implementing, everybody has access to all the licenses for Claude, ChatGPT Pro, Gemini, and the idea is everybody has to present a use case that is solving a problem that they're actually putting in practice, whether it's on the project execution. You're a BIM manager, show me how you're addressing, common daily problems or weekly problems. You are somebody that is in, business development and you're writing proposals. How are you, going through all these sort of big, portals and then scouting all that information and then be able to write a proposal in much faster time frame? And I'll tell you, we have sort of the coder expertise, and those are the guys that already know how to drive the Ferrari. But then we have the non-coder ones that are getting excited and they're actually like showcasing like their own products that they're building. The intention is not to make everybody a developer, but make everybody sort of, more productive in figuring out how to solve specific things that are repetitive, time consuming, and have an impact. But then prioritizing it based on things that are applicable immediately. So it's not like some what if scenario. It's like, you know what, this is gonna save. One guy is like, you know what, it takes me so much time just to get the meeting notes, even if you have the transcript, and they have the action items in terms of sending the email, set up a meeting internally. And anyway, it's like 10 steps. And he said, I'm trying to find something online, like a benchmarking commercial tools that do all of this. And for him, it was faster to actually write the solution. And he showcases, like, hey, here's something that I built. And it's one of many others that are being built. But it's a nice thing because he sort of encourages and fosters that kind of mindset of, can you do things better and not take things for granted?
Tesla, yeah, you just hand it over. I think we have time for one last question.
How big is your team?
Well, 40 people, give or take, and then we're spread out around the world. There's some people here in Cali, and South America, Europe, Asia. But but this is the smaller the team, of course. I see is better for this kind of initiatives. Everybody is sort of on the same, even if they're not physically present. Having those kinds of interactions where the teams that we're now sort of having little workshops, like, you know what? We try to focus on, like there's like 5 people are working just on like that proposal development stage because they're passionate about sort of the, being able to find sort of a scope and, what that entails. But just the showcasing is amazing. And then they record it, everybody sees them, and then they just want to showcase what's next. Like, hey, let me show you how I built this little solution. And again, the intention is not to like turn people into developers, but like how can we fix all the problems that you can identify? So the idea is to map that. Before you start thinking about automation, you have to map out a process and then have sort of the opportunities that then you identify. Like, okay, so now that it takes 20 steps to achieve one thing, how can we reduce that to 1,
We'll do one more question. Sorry. Right.
Sorry, so last year you guys did a talk where you kind of covered the process of using these LLMs, and you were focused on commercial versus custom versus DIY, with a focus on like security and privacy and making an act for connectivity with the LLM. And then this year, it sounds like maybe the ecosystem or the path has changed, and it's partnerships, right? Making partnerships to use those apps to make those same connections. So like, what have you seen then in that last year that has made you shift from everyone can do it themselves to making these partnerships?
Think on a foundational level, right? Like, I would say like last year you wanted to protect it because you didn't know how much the language models were going to evolve. And within the protocols and the type of rules, you were trying the LLMs to actually respond to the tools. I will say like the more we see that this is stable, then therefore it's better to have like specifically use cases so that then we can help on business case.
The other sometimes is the organic opportunities that, present themselves, and then a collaboration evolves into multiple other things. So we see a lot of companies that are going on a journey. We get reached out about AI enablement, like, I don't know, through collaborations with other sort of resellers or companies that are in the industry. We get a lot of referrals that are, talk to these guys about AI or digital twins. Basically, that's like how they associate with us. But in the end, we see that it's sort of the same sort of objective, which is how do we start using AI so we don't fall behind? That's number one. But then how do we, what do we start putting in place today that we can start kind of seeing maybe quick wins? And then how do we make sure that we kind of future-proof it, which is very difficult with the level of acceleration. So Kimon said that in the next 1 to 3 years, there's a lot of disruption. I mean, we see it monthly. Every month, there's like a killer for whatever 10 startups that we were kind of evaluating, talking to, because these guys are trying to solve the building code compliance. I have friends that develop in San Bernardino little sort of renovation sort of ADU type of development. ChatGPT is come so long in terms of evaluating a photo and telling you that if you're code compliant in San Bernardino, and it's not 100% accurate, but it's way more accurate than a year ago. So can he get to a level where all this Claude, Gemini becomes sort of a all-you-can-eat sort of buffet? Now it becomes more the privacy, enterprise level adoption and all that. So that's where that partnership of guidance comes in, where anybody can do it, and we can, happy to share resources that you can learn yourself. The problem is one of those options for collaborations that I mentioned, or the approach, is would you sort of go through those lessons learned yourself, or save the time by kind of partnering with somebody that has faced that? And again, you can always do vetting, and my advice is always try to be agnostic. Always, create an RFP kind of mindset. If you're trying to solve a problem, don't go with whoever you think it might be, the best. Always present the same problem to 3 to 4 different companies and see how they solve it or they approach it. That way it helps you sort of with the vetting decision making.
Thank you.
Thank you.